June 8th, 793 AD, the sun rises over a peaceful monastery on Lindisfarne, a tiny island off the northeastern coast of England. Monks kneel in prayer, their voices echoing through stone corridors. They have no idea that on the horizon, dragon-headed ships are cutting through the morning mist. Within hours, these holy men will witness something that will send shockwaves across all of Europe then. Beginning of an age that will reshape the Western world forever. But here's what nobody tells you. Everything you think you know about Vikings is probably wrong. They weren't just raiders, they weren't just warriors. And those horned helmets, complete fiction. The real story of the Vikings is far more complex, far more fascinating, and far more important to your own history than you've ever been told. Today, we're diving deep into the true saga of the Norsemen, from their mysterious origins in Scandinavia to their shocking reach across 3 continents. This is the story of the Vikings. Let's rewind to around 700 AD, about a century before Lindisfarne. Scandinavia, modern-day Norway, Sweden, and Denmark was a harsh, unforgiving land. Long, brutal winters, rocky soil that barely yielded crops, dense forests and treacherous mountains that isolated communities from one another. But the people who lived there, they were anything but primitive. The Norse had mastered something that would change everything, shipbuilding, while the rest of Europe was still using slow, heavy vessels that hugged coastlines. Scandinavian craftsmen were creating engineering marvels, longships that could sail across open oceans yet were shallow enough to navigate rivers. These ships could beach directly on shorelines without need of a port. They were fast, flexible, and utterly revolutionary. Think of it like this. Imagine if one civilization suddenly invented airplanes while everyone else was still using horses. That's the technological leap we're talking about. But why did they leave? Why venture into the unknown? The answer isn't what you'd expect. Yes, there was overpopulation. Yes, the land was difficult. But recent archaeological evidence suggests something more intriguing: climate change. Between 800 and 1000 AD, the Northern Hemisphere experienced what scientists call the medieval warm period. In Scandinavia, this meant longer growing seasons, which led to population booms. More people meant more mouths to feed, and suddenly, those longships weren't just for fishing anymore. They were tickets to opportunity. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The Vikings weren't a unified nation. There was no Viking empire in the way Rome had an empire. Instead, they were separate kingdoms, jarls, that's earls in Old Norse, and independent chieftains, each with their own ambitions. Norwegian Vikings sailed west to Scotland, Ireland, and Iceland. Danish Vikings focused on England and France. Swedish Vikings traveled east into what would become Russia. They were entrepreneurs, in a sense. Brutal, yes, but also incredibly strategic. The word Viking itself is fascinating. It comes from the Old Norse Viking, which likely means pirate or raider. But here's the kicker: it was a verb, not a noun. You didn't call yourself a Viking. You went Viking, meaning you went on an expedition for trade, exploration, or yes, raiding. Most Norsemen never went Viking at all. They were farmers, craftsmen, merchants, and fishermen. The raiders, we remember, they were the minority, but they're the ones who made history. Let's return to that monastery at Lindisfarne. June 8th, 793 AD, the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, one of our primary historical sources, describes what happened in chilling terms. Never before has such terror appeared in Britain as we have now suffered from a pagan race. The heathens poured out the blood of saints around the altar and trampled on the bodies of saints in the temple of God, like dung in the streets. This wasn't just a raid, it was a psychological earthquake. Why were monasteries the target? Follow the money. Medieval monasteries were essentially banks. They stored gold, silver, precious manuscripts, and valuable religious artifacts. They were wealthy, isolated, and most importantly, completely undefended. Monks had taken vows of peace. They had no armies, no walls, no weapons. To the Vikings, they were low-hanging fruit. But let's be clear about something. The Vikings weren't uniquely brutal for their time. Medieval Europe was soaked in violence. Christian kingdoms fought each other constantly. The difference was that the Vikings attacked Christian holy sites, which was considered the ultimate sacrilege. The monks who wrote the histories, our primary sources, weren't exactly objective reporters. They were traumatized victims describing their attackers. Imagine if all we knew about World War II came exclusively from civilian accounts of bombing raids. You'd get a picture of mindless destruction, not the complex political and military reality. That's what we have with Viking sources. After Lindisfarne, the floodgates opened. In 794, they hit the monastery at Jarrow. In 795, they struck Iona in Scotland, then monasteries across Ireland. By the 830s, Viking fleets weren't just raiding, they were establishing winter camps, preparing for longer campaigns. In 845, a Viking chieftain named Ragnarjes, possibly the same Ragnar you've heard of from legend, sailed up the Seine River with 120 ships and 5,000 warriors. He sacked Paris. The Frankish King Charles the Bald paid him 7,000 pounds of silver just to leave. That payment, huge mistake, because now the Vikings knew Christian kingdoms would pay to avoid fighting. This led to the Danegeld, protection money paid to Viking raiders. For decades, English and French kingdoms hemorrhaged silver trying to buy peace. But some Vikings weren't satisfied with just silver anymore. They wanted land. They wanted to stay. The year is 865 AD. Everything is about to change. A massive force called the Great Heathen Army lands in East Anglia, England. This wasn't a raiding party. This was an invasion force. Thousands of warriors led by the legendary sons of Ragnar Lothbrok, Ivar the Boneless, Halfdan Ragnarsson, and Ubba. Their goal wasn't plunder, it was conquest. Over the next 14 years, they carved through England like a hot knife through butter. They conquered Northumbria, executing Kingla in the brutal Blood Eagle ritual, though historians debate whether this actually happened or was later propaganda. They took East Anglia, killing King Edmund. They seized Mercia. By 878 AD, only one English kingdom remained, Wessex, ruled by a young king named Alfred. Alfred the Great, yes, the same Alfred was England's last hope. In January 878, Vikings launched a surprise winter attack, forcing Alfred to flee into the marshes of Somerset with just a handful of loyal men. Everything hinged on what happened next. Alfred spent months in hiding, rallying his scattered forces. In May 878, at the Battle of Edington, his army met the Viking force led by Guthrum. After a brutal, day-long battle, Alfred's Saxons emerged victorious. But here's what makes Alfred truly great. He didn't slaughter the defeated Vikings. Instead, he negotiated. He offered Guthrum and his warriors land, a huge portion of northern and eastern England, in exchange for peace. And Guthrum's conversion to Christianity. This territory became known as the Danelaw, or literally, the area under Danish law. And this is crucial. For over the centuries, a massive chunk of England was essentially Scandinavian. The Vikings didn't just raid England, they became English. Walk through cities like York, Lincoln, or Derby today, and you're walking through former Viking strongholds. Thousands of English words come from Old Norse: sky, egg, knife, window, husband, law, they, them, their. Even the names of days: Thursday is Thor's day, Friday is Freya's day. The Vikings didn't just conquer England. They merged with it, creating a hybrid Anglo-Scandinavian culture that still echoes today. But England was just one piece of a far larger puzzle. While Danish Vikings were conquering England, Norwegian Vikings were settling Scotland's northern islands, the Orkneys, Shetlands, and Hebrides. They established the Kingdom of the Isles, which lasted for centuries. In Ireland, Vikings founded Dublin in 841 AD. Yes, Dublin, one of Ireland's most iconic cities, was originally a Viking trading post. Limerick, Waterford, Cork, all Viking foundations. In France, Viking raids became so intense that in 911 AD, the French King Charles the Simple made the same calculation as Alfred: give them land to make them stop. he granted the Seine River Valley to a Viking chieftain named Rollo, who became the first Duke of Normandy. Normandy, land of the Northmen, Rollo's descendants. They conquered England in 1066 under William the Conqueror. So technically, Vikings conquered England twice, once as Vikings, once as Normans. The genetic and cultural impact is staggering. If you're of English, Scottish, Irish, or Northern French descent, you almost certainly have Viking DNA. But here's the part of the Viking story that almost never gets told. The Swedish Vikings who went east. While their Norwegian and Danish cousins were raiding westward, Swedish Vikings known as the Russ sailed their longships down the rivers of Eastern Europe. They traveled the Volga, the Dnieper, the Don, cutting through what is now Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. And here's the mind-blowing part. The word Russia comes from Russ, the name given to these Swedish Viking traders. That's right, Russia is named after Vikings. The Rus established trading posts that became major cities: Novgorod, Kiev, Smolensk. They traded furs, slaves, and amber southward to the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic Caliphate. In return, they received silver, silk, and spices. In 860 AD, a Rus fleet of 200 ships attacked Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, the most powerful city in the Christian world. They didn't succeed in capturing it, but the psychological impact was enormous. These barbarians from the north had struck at the heart of civilization. By 882 AD, a Rus leader named Oleg had established the Kievan Rus, a powerful state centered on Kiev. This entity became the foundation of modern Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. The Rus converted to Orthodox Christianity in 988 AD under Vladimir the Great, cementing their connection to the Byzantine world. Think about the scope here. Vikings from Sweden shaped the political and cultural foundation of Eastern Europe. Without them, the entire trajectory of Russian history would be different. But the Eastern Vikings didn't stop at Constantinople. Archaeological evidence shows they traveled even farther. Viking artifacts have been found in Iran, Afghanistan, and even western China along the Silk Road. Arabic coins by the thousands have been discovered in Scandinavian hoards, proof of extensive trade networks. One Arab diplomat, Ahmad ibn Fadlan, encountered Rus traders on the Volga River in 922 AD. His account is one of the few non-Christian descriptions of Vikings we have. He described them as the filthiest of God's creatures. They didn't wash after eating or using the toilet, but also admired their physical stature, calling them tall as palm trees, blonde and ruddy. He also witnessed a Rus funeral involving a ship burial and human sacrifice, giving us one of the most detailed eyewitness accounts of Viking rituals we possess. The Vikings weren't just northwestern European raiders. They were transcontinental traders, connecting Scandinavia with Baghdad, linking the Baltic with the Byzantine, creating trade networks that spanned half the known world. Now, let's talk about arguably the most impressive Viking achievement of all, one that wouldn't be repeated by Europeans for another 500 years. In the late 9th century, a Norwegian chieftain named Ingolfur Arnarson was exiled from Norway for killing several men. Rather than face execution, he sailed west into the unknown Atlantic with his family and followers. In 874 AD, he reached an uninhabited volcanic island. According to the sagas, he threw his high seat pillars, ornate wooden pillars representing authority, overboard and vowed to settle wherever they washed ashore. 3 years later, his slaves found them in a bay surrounded by steam from hot springs. He named the place Reykjavik, Smoky Bay. Today, it's the capital of Iceland. Within decades, thousands of Norwegian settlers followed, fleeing the consolidation of power under King Harald Fairhair. Iceland became a unique experiment, a society without a king. Instead, they established the Althing in 930 AD, one of the world's oldest parliaments, where free men gathered annually to make laws and settle disputes. Iceland became a society of farmers and poets, preserving the sagas and eddas that tell us most of what we know about Viking culture and mythology. But some Vikings wanted to go even farther. Around 985 AD, a hot-headed Icelander named Eric the Red killed several men in feuds and was exiled, sensing a pattern here. He sailed west and discovered a massive island covered mostly in ice. But Eric was a salesman. He named it Greenland to attract settlers, claiming it had good pasture. Technically, the coastal edges did. The interior, solid ice sheet, but people bought it. By the year 1000, around 5,000 Norse settlers lived in Greenland, raising sheep and cattle in small settlements clinging to the frozen coast. Then, Erik's son Leif did something extraordinary. Around the year 1000 AD, Leif Erikson heard tales from an Icelandic trader named Bjarni Herjolfsson who claimed to have spotted land even farther west. Leif bought Bjarni's ship, assembled a crew of 35 men, and sailed into the unknown. He found it, 3 distinct lands, actually. First, a place of flat stones, probably Baffin Island in Canada. Then a forested land, possibly Labrador. Finally, a place with mild winters, wild grapes, and abundant salmon. He called it Vinland, Wineland, or possibly Meadowland. For centuries, this was considered myth, Viking propaganda, fantasy. Then, in 1960, Norwegian archaeologist Helge Ingstad and his wife Stein Ingstad discovered something in Lonso Meadows in Newfoundland, Canada. Clear evidence of Norse settlement. Buildings in the Scandinavian style, a Viking-style iron forge. Artifacts that could only have come from Europe. Scientific dating confirmed it. Vikings had reached North America around 1000 AD, nearly 500 years before Columbus. Let that sink in. While Europe was entering the Middle Ages, Vikings had crossed the Atlantic, established settlements in Canada, and possibly explored even farther south along the North American coast. The settlement at Lonso Meadows didn't last, likely abandoned after just a few years due to conflicts with indigenous peoples whom the sagas call Skrælings, and the sheer distance from Greenland. But the fact remains, Vikings reached the New World half a millennium before it entered European consciousness. They were the ultimate explorers of their age. But back in Scandinavia, everything was changing. By the late 10th century, the Viking Age was beginning to transform into something else entirely. The old ways, the raiding, the pagan worship, the decentralized chieftaincies were giving way to centralized kingdoms and Christianity. The transformation was bloody. In Norway, King Olaf Tryggvason 995 to 1000 AD and later Saint Olaf 1015 to 1028 AD forcibly Christianized the population. Olaf Tryggvason was particularly brutally tortured, mutilated, and killed those who refused baptism. He destroyed pagan temples and forced conversions at sword point. In Sweden, the process was slower. The temple at Uppsala, Scandinavia's greatest pagan holy site, continued functioning until around 1100 AD, making Sweden the last Scandinavian holdout against Christianity. Denmark underwent similar changes under King Harald Bluetooth. Yes, that Bluetooth, the wireless technology, is named after him because he united devices like he united Denmark. Around 965 AD, Harald converted to Christianity and declared Denmark a Christian kingdom. Why did Christianity win? Several reasons. First, Christianity was the religion of power. Every wealthy, organized kingdom in Europe was Christian. To trade, negotiate, and interact with these powers, Scandinavian kings needed Christian legitimacy. Second, Christianity supported centralized monarchy. The Old Norse religion was decentralized, no churches, no organized priesthood, just local customs and family traditions. Christianity offered a unified religious structure that helped kings consolidate power. Third, pragmatism. Many Viking leaders converted for political advantage, then genuinely embraced the faith, or at least, their children did. By 1100 AD, Scandinavia was firmly Christian. The old gods Odin, Thor, Freya survived only in stories and place names. The final nail in the coffin of the Viking Age came in 1066, a year every history enthusiast knows. In September, a Norwegian king named Harald Hardrade, the last great Viking warrior king, invaded England with a massive fleet, claiming the English throne. On September 25th, at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, the English King Harold Godwinson met him in battle. Hardrada was killed. His army was destroyed. It was the last major Viking invasion of England. But Harold Godwinson had no time to celebrate. 3 days after the battle, word arrived. William of Normandy, descended from Vikings, remember, had landed in southern England with another invasion force. Harold's force marched his exhausted army 250 miles south. On October 14, 1066, at the Battle of Hastings, Harold was killed and William conquered England. The Viking Age was over, but its legacy was just beginning. If this deep dive into the real story of the Vikings fascinated you, then I need you to do 3 things right now. First, smash that like button. It tells YouTube to share this with more history lovers like you. Second, drop a comment below. Tell me, what surprised you most about the Vikings? What part of their story do you want me to explore next? I read every single comment and your input shapes future videos. And third, this is crucial, subscribe and hit that notification bell. We're building something special here, a community that goes beyond surface level history to uncover the real, complex, fascinating stories that shaped our world. New documentary drops every week. Don't miss the next one. Now go forth, and remember, the Vikings never backed down from a challenge. Neither should you, Skull.